Hi everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Bullis Show. Today I have with me Brian Beckcom. It's not the Brian Beckham or the Beckham of football fame, but he's because it's spelled a little bit differently. So Brian is a trial lawyer and owner at VB Attorneys. Now, Brian is a computer scientist, philosopher, and trial lawyer, and I just love the intersection of that. So, and we're going to have some fun chats about that. He's based in Houston, Texas. He has been a Texas super lawyer 14 consecutive times, and I want to find out what that means. And every single year, he has been eligible. Brian's law firm, VB Attorneys, is one of the best law firms in the United States and has obtained hundreds of millions for firms' clients, including many record-breaking results. Brian also hosts Lessons from Leaders with Brian Beckcom, a popular podcast featuring military leaders, sports stars, New York Times bestselling authors, scientists, and more. Brian is a former Division I athlete at Texas A&M basketball. He's currently a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and single-digit golfer. And that I don't think that means he's only got one finger. I think that means something else. And an accomplished fly fisherman. So, and we'll have a chat about that. I did my first fly fishing actually in a Montana stream and caught 6. So that's my story quickly.
Beautiful.
But there's more. Okay. Brian graduated from Texas A&M University with degrees in computer science and philosophy. He was a member of the Texas A&M basketball team as well and leaders of the Corps of Cadets, the oldest military organization in the state of Texas. He attended the University of Texas School of Law, where as one of the top students, he graduated with honors, served as an officer of the Texas Law Review and was starting free safety for the Legal Eagles. Brian is consistently viewed by his peers as one of the best lawyers of his generation. Brian has also published hundreds of articles and 6 books about success, happiness, leadership, and other important topics. And we're maybe going to mention those along the way. Brian, that is quite a resume and a CV. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be on, Jeff. I really, really appreciate you having me on. I'm really looking forward to this.
Cool. So can you show me your hands? Like you said, we just not just one digit, is it? Oh, he's got 10 guys. That's right.
Got all 10 digits. Although I will tell you something interesting about that. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is I'm totally addicted to. And one of the most iconic Jiu-Jitsu persons in the world is a Brazilian guy named Jean-Jacques Machado, who has basically one hand.
Right.
And is a dominant Jiu-Jitsu legend with one hand. It's really amazing to watch him go. So, I actually know a couple of golfers that have one arms. It's amazing to watch them play.
Yeah, it would be. I would say that jiu-jitsu guy would be rather handy. Is that true?
I love it. I love it.
I'm just going to stop those dad jokes right now because I'll get in trouble with my children who actually just groan and roll their eyes regularly. So it's okay. But that's your job as a parent, isn't it? To annoy your children, really. That's
I try whenever I'm with my kids to tell as many dad's jokes as I possibly can.
So, Brian, tell us about how you got into law, right? And obviously you excel at it. And I love the intersection of the different disciplines that you have brought to life. And I'm fascinated by philosophy. I interviewed, Nick Bostrom, the philosopher, multi-polymath.
Love Nick Bostrom. Yeah.
So I interviewed him recently, and so I'm interested in those areas. We're going to dive into a few things. So what got you into law? What was there an aha moment? What were you going to university or you're at high school and you're going, I want to go and get those baddies who actually are ripping off corporations and other people? Was it the outlaw sort of thing? I don't know. Tell us where this inspiration become a trial lawyer, because it's a very tough gig.
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting story. I had no interest in being a lawyer. I have no lawyers in my family on either side, as many generations as I can trace back. I come from a family that's primarily composed of military officers. So my dad, my mother, my uncle, my older brother, my grandfather were all in the military. And I went to college. The only thing I was thinking about when I went to college was playing sports. I was a jock.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in the early 1990s. Personal computers were just starting to become a thing. And I had kind of an interest in computers. And so I just said, I guess maybe I'll major in computer science, which was not a big deal back in the early 90s. I mean, there was computer science degrees, but it wasn't nearly as popular as it is now. And so when I was, what I didn't know is when you take computer science at most schools, you also have to take a lot of math and some physics and stuff like that. And somehow I managed to pass all these calculus and differential equations, linear algebra class. I still don't know how I did that. But the thing of it is think about for the listeners. I'm 51. For the listeners that are in that general age group, I was at when I was at university or college, what we call in the United States, uh, the internet. Nobody knew what it was. The internet had just been developed by the federal government, the United States federal government. I had seen the first kind of versions of the internet. Email had just come out. Of course, it was useless because there was nobody to email, really.
No
And
network
so
effect.
yeah, exactly. But this cool thing called email, and there was like 5 people that had an email address. But I was on. I don't want to say I was on the cutting edge of the computer revolution, because in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the mainframe non-personal computers, there was a lot of work done there. We could even go back to Alan Turing if we wanted
Yeah.
to. But as far as the personal computer revolution, I was there when it happened. And as part of the degree program, you have to take another degree. And what most people in computer science would do is they would do math or physics or electrical engineering or something like that. And I said, well, how about philosophy? Because I like philosophy. And they said, that's kind of weird, but go ahead. Well, it turns out that many of the original computer scientists were philosophy people. And it turns out, historically, many of your listeners may know this, there was no such thing as scientists. Like when Isaac Newton was inventing calculus, he was a natural philosopher. And so it was kind of accidental, to be quite honest with you, but philosophy and computer science have a lot more in common than maybe it appears at first. And so I spent 4 or 5 years in university studying philosophy, studying computer science. And the story I tell is I was in a computer lab all the time with a bunch of nerds and geeks, and I didn't want to spend my entire life behind a computer screen with a bunch of nerds and geeks. And so I went to law school. And what do I do now? 25 years later, I sit behind a computer screen with a bunch of nerds and geeks. But I went to law school mainly because I wanted, I was interested in law as philosophy. So law is really, it's a philosophical statement of countries or a state's values. Like, this is what we think is good and this is what we think is bad. And so I didn't know what kind of law I wanted to practice. I was recruited to be what we call an intellectual property lawyer or patent lawyer, which is what a lot of engineers and computer scientists do. And when I was in law school, I asked a couple of lawyers that did that, hey, what's it like being a patent lawyer? And they said, oh, it's like writing a research paper every week. And I said, that sounds fucking terrible. That sounds so boring. And so I found out about this thing called trial law. And trial law, I've been an athlete my whole life. I've been a competitive person my whole life. Trial law is about as close as I've ever been able to find to the thrill of being in the arena and being in a competitive environment like that. But that's kind of how I ended up doing it. The other thing that might be relevant to the story is when I was 10, my mother died. And my father raised my brother and I as a single father. The reason that's relevant to this story is she died as a result of some very, very serious medical malpractice by the United States government. And my dad hired a lawyer to represent my family. I was so young, I didn't know it at the time. I only found this out later. But now I do what that lawyer did for other families. I did the same thing that lawyer did for my family, for other families. So that's part of it too. But the point is, this is just pure luck, but there has been, as you know, and many of your listeners know, a convergence of computer science, law, and philosophy within the last 5 or 6 years as it relates to things like social media and AI and large language models. And so I feel super, super lucky and fortunate to have, just by pure luck, really been studying this stuff, for going on 30 years now. So this is an exciting time for somebody
Mm.
somebody like me. I see all these things kind of converging together now.
Yeah. Yeah. My curiosity has moved on from social media to the intersection of man and machine, or AI,
Yeah,
and humans, because the thing about the machine is it actually challenges and asks us big questions such as, what does it mean to be human?
yeah,
And that fascinates me. And and you only have to put a prompt into ChatGPT to write a document, and then it comes back with something pretty damn good.
yeah,
And you're going, I do writing. We publish with digital publishers. Said, what do I do now? It's taken over. But I think the thing for me is not so much the takeover. I think we're going to look at AI as an enhancement of humanity, because it's the collective intelligence created by zeros and ones shared around the world in digital formats. And that's what amazes me about it, is we actually are collecting the intelligence of the planet and organizing it, distilling it, and turning into creators as well. And that raises those big questions. And yeah, so we are living in pretty exciting times. And so let me leap straight to one. Well, let's go. You went to trial law, which is, it's very combative, isn't it? It's very
yeah,
competitive.
yeah.
So I'm curious, what do you think your secret sauce is, or recipe for your success? I've been intrigued by that. Is it because you just don't bring a knife to a gunfight, you bring an AK-47, right? So
I think my number one, the number one thing that helps me to be successful is I never give up. I'm persistent,
right.
and I'll tell you, it's hard to beat somebody that never gives up. And this idea of persistence is like deeply, deeply ingrained in my bones. And then when you put on top of that the fact that I hate to say this is going to sound so bad, but we've been going to be able to outthink most of my opponents.
Mhm.
Uh, so when you combine like a relentless persistence and a relentless kind of desire to get the results you need to get from your clients with a level of intelligence that allows you to actually execute on that persistence, I think it's a really good combination. I do want to mention something to you about what you just said, though, that I think is really important. You put your finger on one of the most important questions I think humanity can ask right now, which is, what does it mean to be human? This is a profound. I don't want to just pass over that. That is a much more profound philosophical question than I think a lot of people give it credit for. And that is something that I am absolutely fascinated about. And the other thing I'll mention is, at least as it relates to artificial intelligence, we already have and have had artificial intelligence for a very, very long time. So the common example a lot of people use is your thermostat is artificially intelligent.
Yep.
But that's a very, very, and chess playing engines are artificial, but that's a very narrow band of intelligence. And what we're seeing now is a type of intelligence that is a little broader. Now, there's this term called AGI, artificial general intelligence, which basically means a machine that is intelligent in the same way a human is intelligent. That's a kind of a different ball game.
Yeah,
And
that's the
once we
holy grail.
start,
It's the holy
that's the
grail.
holy grail. Yeah, that's the holy grail. And once we hit that point, and like so what I think the most important unanswered scientific question in humanity today is, what the question that fascinates me by far the most, and that I can tell you with 100% confidence that nobody knows the answer to, at least right now, is, what is consciousness? Like,
Mm,
what is the
yeah.
evolutionary point of that? How did it arise? But more importantly, for purposes of our discussion, Jeff,
Mm,
can consciousness arise out of like, is consciousness dependent on the biological substrate that we call the human brain? Or if you had a non-biological device or something that was arranged in a certain way, could consciousness arise out of that? And I don't know the answer to that. Nobody else does. But like, when you think about like what is consciousness, and I think it's a similar question to like, what does it mean to be human? And it used to be, gosh, 5, 10 years ago, I would look at people looking at their smartphones, and I would, in my brain, it would be like information is going from your brain to the phone. And now when I look at people looking at their smartphones, what I see is, I see a device that's it's going the opposite direction. It's programming
Us.
your brain. But we already have, I would argue that we already are cyborgs now in some way. It's just that the device is not inside of our body. It's attached to our hand, generally speaking. So we already have some built-in, or I don't even know my kids' cell phone numbers anymore, because I don't have to memorize them because they're in my phone. And so I've already offloaded a lot of my intelligence. But I think this question about what does it mean to be human? What is consciousness? I'm not sure there are any more important questions we can ask in the world.
And that's something. And, we look at things like motivation, then we look at things like discipline. Like, for me, one thing I reflect on a lot is when I started my little humble blog back in 2009, and it was a curiosity about social media. And then it became a compulsion. And then it almost became an obsession, because while I had my day job, I actually got up at 4:30 a.m. for 4 years and wrote till 9 a.m. and started my day job. And it was almost like a force was coming out of me. It was, in reflection, I went, where did that come from? It was not to do with, sure, there was discipline. I got up early, but it wasn't hard. I just did it. And that drive and that motivation is very much part of being human. And I am asking the question, like, where did that come from? And it's almost like you're channeling the universe through you somehow, which is, I was doing what I was meant to do, and you're obviously doing what you're meant to do. But where does that come from? And then we get into quantum physics, because a lot of physicists are actually really, they're philosophers, because they're asking the big questions of the universe.
They absolutely are. Yeah, they absolutely are.
So for me, on reflection about what it means to be human, obviously you've been asking that question for a long time as well. And then we have AI show up, which then challenges even more, asks even bigger questions. And where's it all going? Dystopia, utopia, so, and Nick Bostrom's 2 books, Superintelligence, which was a dystopian look at what do we call multimodal, not multimodal, but a multi-universe, or AI, which would be controlled by different people, or would be one AI take over the world. He was very dystopian. His latest book, Deep Utopia, is more utopian and is really out there. So, and I had the pleasure of interviewing him on a podcast while I was in New York recently. So, but where does motivation come from? Where does your drive come from, Brian, to do what you do? Right. And do you have a bit of a handle on that? Is it like, does it come from, some people say that meditation, by doing meditation, you disconnect from the actual physical world and allow the actual universe to be revealed through you, which is very metaphysical. Have you sort of said to yourself sometimes, where does this drive to be Brian and what he does come from? Have you asked that question?
All the time. And you bring up the subject of meditation. I've been a meditator for going on 10 years now, and probably one of the top 5 or 6 things I've ever done in my life. And one of the things that I'll tell you that's taught me is that the self that we think we have, this like idea, this pilot in our head that's dictating, does not exist. It does not exist. Okay. I'm just telling you that. And the reason I know that is because I've experienced that firsthand. I've had that no self experience that the Buddhists talk about. Now it literally lasts for like half a second.
Yeah.
Because as soon as your brain comes back online, the experience goes away. But the point of that is, I think the important point that we can take out of that as philosophers and scientists is, we can definitively say the experience that we're having is not reflective of, quote, true reality, whatever that is. So you have these things bouncing around in your head. And there's also, Nick Bostrom is an unbelievably intelligent person.
Mm.
There's a lot of talk about, like, for example, there's a great book called Gödel Escher Bot. It's, Gödel is Kurt Gödel, The Incompleteness Theorem of Mathematics. M.C. Escher is the artist that that paints all these really interesting kind of physics type pictures. And that Bach, of course, is the composer, J.S. Bach. But the notion in that book is, and many books like it, are trying to figure out, like, how does consciousness arrive? And kind of the hypothesis behind that is these self-referential loops ultimately create an image of the self, and that is who you become. And so the reason I'm talking about that is the question you asked is, like, where does your motivation come from? And I think it's hard for most people to answer that, including me, completely, because there's a subconscious part of your experience that you don't really have access to. And in fact, there are some people that say you really have no free will at all, period, that you're just kind of programmed by your environment and your experiences and things like that. And I think by and large, like the free will debate, I mean, we could talk about that for hours and hours. The free will debate, at the very least, I think, does show us that a lot of the things that we do, we don't do them for the reasons we think we do them.
Yeah.
What we do them, and then we come up with a rationalization afterwards for why we did them. And again, that's because there's this conscious experience that we have, but that's like the tip of the iceberg, and underneath the ocean is all this subconscious stuff going on underneath. And so in terms of, like, for me personally, I think, not to psychoanalyze myself too much, but clearly when your mother gets a terminal illness when you're 5 years old and you see her go through that for 5 years, what that's like, that will affect you either consciously or subconsciously for the rest of your life. It's kind of like if you're abused as a child, that's the kind of thing that, consciously or not, will motivate you to a certain extent. So one of the things consciously that motivated me was, I was raised, like I said, by a single father, my brother, and I wanted to demonstrate to people that you could succeed if you were raised by a single father. And so that kind of motivated me to do what I did. Of course, the other part of it was, I had my close family member, my mother, die, and we hired a lawyer who helped out our family. And so, of course, I look back on that subconsciously, and it kind of explains why I do what I do. But that it's not like I was in high school and college saying I want to be just like that guy and I want to go be a lawyer and do what he does. It was almost like more subconscious than conscious. And so, the other thing I've been super duper interested in, Jeff, and I know you've probably read a ton about this, but Kahneman and Tversky and behavioral psychology, where essentially, their famous book is Thinking Fast and Slow. Basically, the idea is oftentimes you don't really know why you're doing what you're doing. So, for example, if I say, hey, Jeff, what's a great action movie? Something's going to pop into your head, and you had no real conscious choice in what popped into your head, right? It just popped in there. Or if I say, hey, Jeff, don't think of a pink elephant, the first thing you just thought of was a pink elephant, right? Because in order to, and there's a really specific scientific reason for that. In order for you not to think of something, your brain has to think about it and then not think about it. Like that's how the operating system works.
Yeah.
But I guess the larger point is we're all having this experience. Some of us have a more conscious, like I would argue some people have more consciousness than others. Everybody does not have the same level of consciousness. Certain people have more agency than others, but everybody is having some sort of conscious, or most people are having some sort of conscious experience. But everyone is also being driven by the subconscious experience. And that right there is a pretty sharp dividing line between man and machine.
Yeah.
And because the machines don't have this like everything they have is programmed into the machine,
Yeah.
or at least so far it is. And they also, the other thing they don't have that I think is really important is humans obviously have emotions, and the emotions drive the decision-making process for good or for bad. And that is not true with machines either. And again, that could be good or bad. Like for a chess program, you really don't want your emotions to get involved at all. But if you're building a self-driving car and you're trying to decide what you should tell that car to do, if it's a choice between killing two 10-year-old school children and 5 nuns that are walking down the street, and it's got to make a decision, right? I mean, maybe you do want some emotion involved in that kind of decision. But again, the point is I don't think any of us has full access to all of that. Like we don't know really what motivates us completely.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, the mention about consciousness and decisions. And that reminds me of a quote I read recently is we think we're doing thinking, but thinking's doing us.
Yeah, for sure.
And
for
sure. And that's why meditation is so powerful, I think, is that it opens the door to infinity, whatever that is, to an unlimited universe, because we've quietened the mind, so the thinking's no longer doing us, or else we're watching our thinking as an observer, which is what. And I think I've been reflecting on what meditation really means. It's not about silence. It's about us observing even our thoughts. So a lot of us go, we're failing if we actually don't have a silent mind. The reality is the power of meditation is just becoming the observer of the thoughts and going, oh, I'm thinking that. And next or whatever. But I've been meditating since the 1980s, and I do meditate, every 5 to 7 days a week, and I've had some really blissful moments, which I just I don't know. You just went somewhere else, and it's brief, or it can be a bit longer, but I really have enjoyed it because I realize that the power comes from silence, not from forceful doing. And that reminds me too of something. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, is what's our meaning and purpose? Because that's the AI asks those questions, and Nick Bostrom goes into we can actually create artificial purpose. That's part of his actual thinking, which is really quite fascinating. And you were right, before I get onto this next thing I'm going to raise, is that Nick Bostrom's got a big brain. I was slightly intimidated to interview him. What I did was, to prepare for it, I'd already almost finished his book, Superintelligence. I would then, within a few days, I'd read both books fully. I'd taken notes. So I said, I've got to be prepared. Because you're dealing with this big brain that is just thinking things. You're going, where did that come from, Nick? So it was a fabulous discussion about philosophy.
I've read Superintelligence, and I think it's a phenomenal book, and he's a phenomenal thinker.
Yeah.
But I do think he and others like him make a fundamental reasoning flaw when they talk about the singularity, when they talk about artificial intelligence. And you know what it is? They don't take into account the fact that there already may be superintelligence in the universe already. We just don't know about it. Like there may be beings that are so smart that, like, when we're walking down the street and we see there's ants on the street, we don't even notice them, right? And so this idea that, oh, there's going to be this singularity, or there's going to be this super intelligence, I think,
it's already here.
it's already here, and it could be here in ways that we can't even fathom. It could be, for instance, with the question as it relates to what is consciousness, it could be that it is impossible for us to get outside of our consciousness in order to evaluate our consciousness. So like it could be that that is a question, like an N+1 question,
Yeah.
or a 3-body question that's just not answerable.
Yeah.
And to me, the really cool thing about this is a lot of this stuff kind of converges. So take, for example, Gödel's incompleteness theory. Well, a lot of your listeners will be familiar with that. For those that aren't, Kurt Gödel was a logician who basically proved that no self-contained mathematical system could be completely self-contained. There's always going to be a contradiction. So, for example,
Paradox.
this statement is false, is unprovable, but there's truth to it. Gödel proved that, and that's really, really, really important for computer science. But I think it's also important for the things that we're talking about, which is there may be things that we just will never be able to have the answer to, which is okay. Like there may be things that our brains, either by the physical design or by the nature of the logic of it, we just can never finally get to the bottom of the answer. And I think people that like worries people at some level, but in other levels, like I think it's okay. Like it's okay to say, like, we will never be able to prove math is true. Like there will never be a proof that will prove this system of math is true, and it's true at all places and all times because of Gödel's incompleteness theory. And it may be the same thing with consciousness. We may get to the point where we can say, this is what consciousness is. This is what we think about how it arises, but we really still can't figure out, for example, why it arose.
Yeah.
Like, what was the purpose of it?
Yeah. And scientists and philosophers struggled with it for centuries and millennia, frankly. And even Einstein struggled with quantum physics.
Yeah, he was very troubled.
Yeah.
In particular about what they call spooky action at a distance. Like he was troubled by the notion that in quantum physics, something that happened in one location could have an instantaneous impact on something that happened at a different location, which would seem to violate the notion in general relativity that nothing's faster than the speed of light. Like if information can travel instantaneously, that's faster than the speed of light, and that violates both Newtonian physics and general relativity. And that's the other thing that I think he was bothered about, which I think this is really important too. So in quantum physics, one of the ideas is the act of observation has an effect on what you're observing. And the famous experiment with that is Heidegger's cat in the box experiment, right?
Exactly.
But
Dead or alive.
That, but this is something that I think is super duper important. So essentially, and again, this is just a high level explanation. So when you take a measurement of something, you impact what you're measuring. That's one idea, and like the observer impacts what he or she is measuring. I think that is the same exact thing with consciousness. Okay, so think about this. When you observe your consciousness through meditation, you change your consciousness by the act of observing it. And so I think, and I actually would go so far as to speculate that the human brain is a quantum system. Like and I think there's evidence, for example, the observation of your thoughts changes your thoughts. That's a quantum phenomenon, right? And so, but I think it's really interesting. Einstein was very, very troubled by that, but I'll tell you what, and you know, the famous joke about quantum physics, if you say you understand it, you don't.
That's right.
But there's the predictions of quantum mechanics have proven to be so accurate that whether we understand it or not almost doesn't matter, right?
No.
And but I think it's really, so if you're meditating, Jeff, and you
Mhm.
start having this no self experience, the second you start observing that experience, you change the
Yes.
experience,
Yep.
which is the same idea in quantum mechanics. If you people have this idea from classical physics that an electron is like a dot, and an electron is actually a wave of potentialities. And but once you measure it, then you fix it in place,
Yeah.
right?
Energy becomes matter.
Energy becomes matter. But then what happens that's really cool about that is because you fix it in place, now you've lost the ability to determine its velocity, right? Because it's now you've observed it and you've frozen it in place. Whereas when you're not observing it, it has some movement or some velocity. So
Yeah.
Einstein was troubled by it, but Einstein was wrong.
Yeah. It's reality.
Yeah.
But being non-reality. It's really fascinating to talk about these topics because it gets into things like motivation and purpose and meaning, and a lot of it asks, why am I here? That's another big question.
Yeah, for sure.
And generative, the chatbot actually challenges that by going, well, you thought you were a writer, that's why you're here, but hey, I can do this better than you can. So,
By
so
the way, that's not true. Like, so far at least, if you're a good writer and you read 99% of AI generated chats,
I
you
know,
can, there's always something a little bit off, right? And
no,
and it's
it
an
is off. It is off.
and it's an interesting question, by the way,
Yeah,
why that is. Like you can still tell, at least most people can still tell, or most well educated people can still tell when they're listening to a robot,
mm.
right? We maybe it's something. So in other words, the Turing test has not been passed completely.
No,
Maybe it will be ultimately, but it's interesting why, these LLMs, these large language models, have these little quirks where they do things that are obviously not human. That's
yeah,
an interesting question by
yeah,
itself.
yeah. I think the chatbots, ChatGPT, can do mechanistic writing, which, in other words, it's got all the facts, collates them, organizes, it's all done. That's nice, but it doesn't touch human souls. The storytelling that we as good human writers use, they use good storytelling, and they're powerful storytellers, and that's actually core to being human. Is we've been telling stories that distill our humanity for millennia,
Yeah,
and the book, Sapien, by the Israeli author, he's worried about the fact is that if computers get really good at storytelling, then that becomes another species. That's what he's worried about. But I think you're completely correct in that the ChatGPT, what it produces as a document, it's just missing that human element, whatever that is. We can't put a finger on it, but it's just soulless. It's not a story. It's no
yeah.
humanity woven into the nuts and bolts, despite it trying. So, but let's move on a little bit. I'm interested by this. For me, and I'm sure you've asked the question too, what's my purpose on this planet? And I love Joseph Campbell's take on it. He says, we have no purpose except to follow our bliss.
Yeah.
And that's where you end up with flow rather than force. And this, for me, it's the combination of two words where your curiosity becomes a compulsion. It becomes compelling to you to act, and you don't know why. But I think there's power in that single three-word sentence by Joseph Campbell. That is your purpose, to follow your bliss and trust the universe to deliver why you're here to you through a door that you open through things like meditation. I'm interested in your thoughts on what you think purpose is about. I'm curious.
This is a great question. And this is something that this is a big question that I've asked myself a lot in the past, probably 4 or 5 years. Like, what is the purpose of life? What is my purpose? Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, basically, tremendous writer. He talks a lot about the hero's journey is about like this archetypal Ulysses kind of, the hero goes away and comes back and all that stuff. And Yuval Harari, the author of Sapiens, is really into the notion of storytelling as well. And I actually think that it is impossible for humans to reason without stories. Like, that is how we think. Like, that's how important story. I don't think there's anything more important in the world than stories. I think stories are more powerful than armies. They're more powerful than religions, because religions, what really are religions? Religions are stories, right? And we can debate about whether they're true stories or whether they're fiction or nonfiction, but that's what they are. And what are militaries? Militaries are things that carry out the stories that we tell each other. So I think this notion of story is super. As a matter of fact, I think it's fundamental to thinking. As it relates to purpose, here's what I would say. What I've been saying is, I do not know what the purpose of life is. I don't know what we're here for, but I think if you are trying to make the most of whatever abilities and talents you've been given, and you are following something you're really curious about, you could do a lot worse. Like, I don't know if that is the like, maybe there is no the purpose, like Joseph Campbell said, which, again, that is completely okay. Like, people think you have to have, there's no rule that says there has to be a purpose for anything, right?
Exactly.
Some people think that there's something wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But what I would say is, your purpose should be to make the most of whatever talents you've been given. This is kind of what I've been talking to my kids about a lot lately. Like, whatever you've been given, whatever circumstances you've been that have been assigned to you, making the most out of that is a pretty good way of living your life. And at the end of the day, I have a very good friend. He's a very religious person, very Catholic. We have a lot of discussions about this. He has this thing. He says, Brian, he said, you can't just say what you don't believe. You have to come up with a hypothesis of what you do believe. And I actually think that's true. Like, I actually think that there are people that just sit there and just chop everybody down. They're only doing half of the intellectual work. Like, you need to come up with some sort of working theory. Just being a contrarian for the purposes of being a contrarian is not enough. And I actually, this is my working theory. This is pure speculation, but I actually think your consciousness and my consciousness and everybody's consciousness is the manifestation of a larger consciousness of some sort. And we're just kind of a window to that general universal consciousness, some people will call it God, some people will call it universal consciousness. Some people will just say it's a quantum phenomena that just is a fundamental component of the universe, like gravity. But I think, in terms of purpose, what I ask myself is, am I getting the most out of what I've been? I've been blessed with I've had some hard things in my life happen, but I've also been blessed with, certain abilities. And so I constantly ask myself, am I getting the most out of those? Number one. And number two, I want to leave the world just a tiny little bit better off when I leave it than when I started. And so that's kind of that's my North Star as far as purpose goes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's that North Star is very important. I think that's where people like you and others and all of us make a difference, in that leaning into why those innate abilities. I think the philosophy, which is Japanese, is ikigai, which is the intersection of your innate ability, your experience. Those elements all come together as an intersection, is why you should be here, and to tap into that. And just while you're talking about, super consciousness, and you mentioned it, is that I read Wayne Dyer book, who passed away in his 70s, fantastic. He said that we should view humanity as a blanket where we stick our heads up through this black blanket, if you like. We all stick our heads up through the blanket. Underneath, we're all connected, which is a superconscious. And that sort of like visual analogy, metaphor for me, I went, you know what? That's stuck with me for decades now. And I think we are all connected somehow through energy. Quantum physics has maybe explained a bit of it. Um, and we are just our little heads, we're just little human dots that are connected all underneath this blanket that are actually connected to the superconscious and to the infinite. And we don't know what that is. But anyway, I just love the way Wayne came up with that, metaphor.
And it's interesting. I'd never heard that before, but what I had heard is in quantum mechanics, it's really hard to wrap your head around the idea that things are composed of waves and of particles. Like it's both. The best analogy that I've heard to describe that is the ocean. Like when you look at the ocean, you see the waves, and the waves exist, and you can see the crest of the wave and the trough of the wave, and the wave is a thing. But if you get close enough to the ocean, you can also see that it's composed of individual water molecules, right? And so that analogy you just drew of the collective blanket people pop, that kind of reminds me of the ocean. Like the waves are
Made
our
up of,
individual consciousness, yeah.
yeah.
But it's composed, the ocean itself is a much, much bigger thing than just the individual waves.
Yeah. And for me, I don't know, but I certainly feel all the time that I feel locked in my own loop of thinking, my templates and my
Yeah,
experience. And I'm going, I know there's much more to be unlocked because there is so much more intelligence that is just this energy field, it feels for me. And so the question for me is how to unlock that? How do I escape my own box, if we like?
yeah,
Because it's a much bigger world out there. And I think meditations may be part of that answer.
yeah,
I'd be interested in your thoughts. Do you feel that for me, I'm stuck in Jeff's world, right? And
yeah.
I do certain things I think I've got control, but I think, control's got us, whatever that control is. And for me, trying to tap into that is part of my journey. And I think I've actually tapped it sometimes. Like when I started my blog, it's just a simple thing, but I felt like I'd tapped into a force field that I didn't know about, but I was able to access it. And the other thing that too, I think out of this comes things like, where does motivation come? You can't just, if people say, well, you just got to show discipline. You're going, well, hang on, that really only works for so long.
Yeah.
So where does that force come from? And I think meditation is part of that solution. And sometimes it's shown up, these glimpses of a force that seems beyond your own mortal being. And
Yeah.
so I don't know, do you feel that sometimes you feel like I'm trapped in this limited universe that I can only see? I know
All the
that's,
time,
yeah,
all the time.
okay.
And I hate it. Like I think people that think a lot get trapped even more. And the paradoxical thing about this, Jeff, is there is a transcendent state. I've been there. Most of your listeners have been there. It's
Yeah,
that state you're in where your consciousness is offline, but you're still conscious, and you're in some people call it a flow state, for example.
mm,
When I'm rolling jujitsu and I'm in the middle of a jujitsu roll, my conscious brain is not online really. I'm just doing. Like some
you're
people
just
find
doing,
that when they're
yeah,
when they're fly fishing or when they're painting, and it takes this terrible self-referential ego offline a little bit. And the ironic thing about it is that meditation is the same way. The ironic thing about it is you can't think your way out of your own thoughts. Like, because if you try to think by thinking, you're just making the loop stronger and stronger. But there is a transcendence, the transcendent state. The interesting thing about it, one of the things that I think clearly makes humans different from other animals is the level of self-consciousness we have, and this experiential quality that we have. But the funny thing about it is a better experience, and most people that have been in a flow state will say it's better than this self-referential experience, involves not thinking. And you know what I think about some of the time, Jeff, is like you and I are a speck on a speck on a speck on a speck in terms of the timeline of the universe. For the 99.9% with a line under it, or a line over it, as far as you want to go of the time of the universe, you and I will not exist as conscious human beings, at least as we do now. And people are, that idea frightens people to death, right?
Literally.
But why should it? Because you were already dead you did not exist for hundreds of billions of years, and it was okay. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
It's not like you were tortured for hundreds of billions of years. And so to me, the transcendent state is real. I think people get addicted to thinking, and I'm, as guilty of that as anybody.
Yeah.
The transcendent state is one of the reasons you were so passionate about your blog, and I've been passionate about things too, is you were probably getting up and literally in a flow state a lot of the time.
Oh yeah.
And that's enjoyable.
And you know what it came out of? It came out of following my bliss. It was a curiosity.
Yeah.
And this for me is, the book Flow by I'm trying to think of his name, the author.
Caesar Jensky. I can't pronounce it. Miguel it's a Czech name, I think, or Romanian name.
I read it about 20 odd years ago, maybe 30. And so for me, a lot of us try to bring discipline to the table, and we should actually be bringing flow to the table. So how do you get into that state of flow? And what I love about your resume is that you are a paradox of thinking and non-thinking.
Yeah.
You are doing jiu-jitsu, you are doing fly fishing, which are non-thinking things. They're doing things, but they take you to a state of bliss, obviously, because you love doing those, but they stop you thinking. And then you bring non-thinking to a thinking industry as well, which is law.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that is, I'm just thinking, as you talked about jiu-jitsu, I'm thinking ninjas, and you are out thinking your competition. And when they go, look at me here, you're actually on the ceiling, and so we all are paradoxes. Your paradox for me sits on your bio that I read, which is you are both thinking and non-thinking. I think that's where the magic happens, when you get that tension right and play with it. And that's what I think you've done with your life, which I find fascinating.
Well, thank you for saying that.
It's because I love, I've got a good mate who's basically a maths whiz, but he does origami and does martial arts as well, right?
Nice.
Because he treats origami as a mathematical competition, but in his own brain, because he's got to work out the math to do the origami. And but yeah, it's really this, for me, meditation.
I hated math, by the way, until about 10 years ago. I hated math until I realized what it was. And all math is a language.
It is.
It's just a language to describe things. And once I kind of what's calculus is just a language to describe change and motion. Geometry is just a language to describe space. And once I kind of got that, I became utterly fascinated with math. But like you talk about origami, jiu-jitsu, and I study it when I'm not practicing it, is so rewarding to me, because the more I understand about it outside of the jiu-jitsu gym, when I go into so I study it, I think about it, I learn about it, and then I go in and my brain goes offline and I'm better at it. And it's the same thing with fly fishing. Like, the more you know about the types of entomology, the types of bugs on the water, what the conditions are, whether the fish like to eat a certain bug, what depth of the water you want to be, the better off you will be as a fisherman. But once you throw that fly in the water, you're not thinking about any of that stuff. You're just doing it. You know what I mean? It's the
Yes.
same thing. It's the same thing with painting. Winston Churchill, one of my heroes, was a big painter, wrote a small book called Paintings and Pastime that talks about this. He said, I plan the paintings, I plan the colors, I'm thinking, but then when he's doing the painting, he's just doing, you know.
Yeah.
And that to me is where the kind of the balance is. You know, you think, and then you do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, I think you've got to, as humans, we've got to get that balance between thinking and non-thinking. Because thinking is doing us most of the time.
Yeah.
And we've really got to try and skate that. So in AI in law, I'm just curious about this. I've just been loving this chat about what it means to be human, frankly. That's what we've been talking about. We haven't talked digital entrepreneurship, and we're not going to, I don't think. But AI in law, how do you think that's going to play out? I'll be intrigued by your view, and I'm sure you've got some views about that in terms of how much AI can the law profession use, and I think that's actually almost how long's a piece of string as well. Um, so interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, so what I like to do when I talk about this topic, and I've talked about this topic quite a bit, AI in the law, is I like to differentiate between the current biggest thing in the law, which is large language models, and then AI is a separate phenomenon. And so let's start with large language models. When people say chat GPT and things like that, that is like saying a Corvette or a Porsche or a Cadillac. Chat GPT is a smaller subset of what we call large language models.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Large language models are basically math engines, predictive math engines that take large amounts of data and then literally predict what they call them tokens. And tokens can be a whole word, it can be a single letter, it can be a group of letters. But they take one token, they predict what, and they just recursively do that. And so it's not intelligent under the hood. Now, the way it manifests itself appears intelligent in many ways, and some of the things that are happening appear intelligent. But the point is, I think large language models are going to have a huge impact, not only on the law, but on any industry where writing or talking or communication is involved. It's already having a massive impact. So I'll just give you one or two little solid examples. Like, you can write a contract in 10 seconds now, most of a contract. Now, a human's got to go through and review it and take out the errors and stuff, but the efficiencies that are created by that
are enormous.
Are hard to believe. Like, you and I can get off this podcast and within 15 seconds have an AI generated summary of what we talked about, right? Sure. Now, there's a problem with that, though. Okay, this doesn't just apply to the legal business. This applies to any business where information exchange is important. Our brains have a limited bandwidth. So what I found with large language models is I can produce a ton of stuff, but I can't review it any faster, right? Like, I can't get it inside my head any faster. So what I see large language models creating a ton of efficiency in any single industry where information exchange using either written or spoken language is important. But we're going to have a problem because it's going to be like so much. We're going to be able to produce so much so fast, but we're not going to be able to consume it any faster necessarily. So what does it matter if we can produce it that fast, right? Like, yep. You can only read so much. Of course, there's, Elon Musk and Neuralink and all this other stuff. That's one of the things they're trying to solve, is increasing the bandwidth of our brains. So I think LLMs are going to have a huge impact, but there's a hard physical limit, the amount of information that we as humans can process.
Yep.
Now let's talk about AI. So AI is already built into everything around us already. In the smartwatch I'm wearing, the thermostat, these computers, our smartphones, Apple is now baking AI into the phone.
Yep.
And I think, not artificial general intelligence, artificial intelligence is going to get to the point where it's so ubiquitous that it just becomes part of our experience on it like all the time. Matter of fact, so I've got the Apple Vision Pro, which is this headset. Most people are completely missing. They think it's like a way to watch movies and porn and stuff like that. And it is. It's great. I mean, I don't know about the porn, but I'm sure it's great. But you know, it's great for consuming content. But what people are missing about this is the operating system. You're literally operating the thing with your eyeballs and your fingers. And it's as close as I've ever seen to operating a computer with your mind.
Right.
So like so like literally you just look around. And so we're getting to the point where we're just going to be walking around in our environment and we're going to go, hey, we're going to look over on the wall and we're going to say, pull up an 80-foot TV screen and play Goodfellas. Or we're going to say, hey, pull up the New York Times cooking app. I want to cook that pasta. Send an order to Instagram. And there's not going to be a phone in your hand. There's not going to be a computer. It's just going to be baked into the environment. That's where I think AI, not artificial general intelligence. Now let's talk about AGI, artificial general intelligence. The second we get AGI, all bets are off. Like
it is. Yep.
All bets are off. There's nobody can predict what's going to happen. Like the singularity, there's a lot of talk about once we have AGI, singularity will occur. I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But what I do know is nobody knows. Like once AGI happens, like nobody knows what the consequences of that are, which is why I think it's so important, by the way, that we talk about these issues. And it's also the point I've been making for years now is these are not technical questions. These are not questions that should be answered by people in Silicon Valley that are running billion-dollar companies. They have no more knowledge about the ethic. These are ethical questions. These are moral questions. And the people that run these companies not only don't have any more knowledge about the ethics and morals, they have incentives that are bad for the rest of humanity. And so we need leaders who are versed in ethics and morality and the legalities, who can speak to, you know, what kind of society we want and what kind of safety parameters we want around AGI. I don't think it's enough to just say, do whatever you want to do, Elon Musk, and we don't care whether it's good or bad for humanity. As long as it's good for your company, we'll support it. Like,
yeah,
I think we need to realize that these engineers and physicists and computer people don't know jack shit about, they don't know anything more about morality than you and I do, or the trained philosophers are. But for some reason, we feel like because they're rich and successful, that they have some moral component to their thinking that's better than ours. And I would argue that not only is that not true, but it's actually the opposite. Like actually they have worse incentives, which we need to be really, really careful about. And the thing that I worry about, Jeff, is we're going to get to the point where it's going to be impossible for us to push back because the tech companies will have so much power that if you and I get together and try to push back a little bit, their algorithms will turn around and just nuke us to death. Like nobody will even see what we're saying. So,
and I've just written about that in terms of the algorithms. It's a battle of the algorithms now, battling humans and the titans. We have 7 companies worth over $1 trillion now, which is bigger than the GDP of most countries.
Yeah.
And out of that power and money comes hubris, and we only have to watch Elon Musk seemingly descend into a person I no longer recognize, I think, where he started from. And I think that's the challenge for Silicon Valley.
Yeah. I think Elon, I drove a Tesla for 15 years and was a huge fan. And I think he's a visionary and is doing a lot of things.
He's a visionary. Yep.
But I think Elon Musk, there's real questions about like what he's even trained in, whether he, like when he bought Twitter, it was crystal clear that he doesn't know anything about programming, even though he pretends like he does. And I think Elon has confused luck with talent. And he was in the right place at the right time. He happened to be in Silicon Valley when everything was booming. He happened to invest in PayPal. And that was just pure coincidence. And Tesla's kind of the same thing. Like he did not create Tesla, he bought Tesla.
He bought Tesla.
And
Yep.
and without the federal government, it would have failed. The taxpayers have supported it for 10 plus years. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying it's different. Like, again, especially in America, I don't know if Australia has this issue, but in America, we confuse success in business with being intelligent. And those things are not necessarily connected.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's really, I think the power of celebrity, which has been pushed by Hollywood and fame, is really quite scary. And the thing too is we've got a lot of information in the world, but we've got very little wisdom.
That's a great way I love that. That's a great way to put it.
And I think we've got to work a lot more on wisdom, and it cannot be left to the titans of industry that are the global behemoths that are worth trillions of dollars, because they're serving only one master, and it's called mammon.
That's right.
Money,
That's
love of money. So we've got to bring some other smart, beautiful humans to the table that are wise, and they will not be technologists. And it could involve, the Nelson Mandelas of this world. These need to be brought to the table that know about being good human beings and what that looks like, because I think we're losing sight of what success really is. And that's one of the big questions I ask is, what is success? And it's much bigger than earning $1 million a year.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
So for me, I'm thinking putting together a group of people that brings different disciplines, and it's to do with AI, because I just feel that my brain is trapped in its own thinking, and I need other people to help me enhance my thinking. But collectively, I think as humans, we can make a difference much bigger than individuals. So how can we tap that, and how can we have discussions? And AI is asking these big questions, and also the creation of a new species, which is a multinational trillion-dollar companies, which have got more power than nations.
Yeah.
That also needs to be, like, the tax law needs to be looked at, for example, globally, because they're raping and pillaging basically the revenue of the entire planet. And then there's, on top of that, is mining as well. And we're trying to live in touch with the world, and just looked at a little book that was in review recently. Said, and this is where we talk about technicality and physics and everything else, but on the other hand, and talk about going to virtual worlds, but I think there's magic and wisdom that sits in the natural world by being in it. And I'm sure you experience that with fly fishing, for example.
Yeah.
And no headset is going to give you that.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And, in many ways, like, you can really nerd out about this, but for example, I'm going to Colorado on Saturday, which is a very mountainous state in the United States. It's because Houston's very hot right now, and that's where I like to go fly fishing. I like to camp and stuff. But just you could literally walk down any path in Colorado, pull a leaf off of a tree, look at that leaf, and the amount of engineering and science. I mean, it just renders everything we've done from a technological standpoint to be almost like meaningless. Like the human brain, for example, like the computer in our head is such a miracle of engineering, physics, and science. And like these computers we're putting together are just cheap knockoffs of that. And but what the talk about wisdom, I think, is important. And so I'm a free market guy. I think the free market is really, really good, but I think the free market needs rules, and because otherwise it's just a free for all. And I also think there's, like, in America, for instance, the law requires corporations to maximize shareholder value.
Exactly. That's the goal.
There's nothing that says that has to be the law, though.
Exactly.
We could change the law to say corporations have a obligation to maximize shareholder value while at the same time minimizing the externalities on the environment. We could say that, and that could be the law. And there's nothing that says it couldn't, and there's nothing that says it couldn't work. I mean, we have a good example of this right now. The country of Bhutan has the gross national happiness product
I
instead of
know
the gross
exactly.
national product, right?
That was exactly what I was going to bring up as you're talking about it.
Yeah.
Bhutan
Yeah.
has
So
a
the,
happiness index.
yeah. And so the point I try to, people are
Yeah,
always like, well, the corporation have to do that because that's a law. And I say, well, I understand that, but who said that has to be the law forever? And that wasn't the law forever. As a matter of fact, in America, at least, it wasn't until the early 1900s. It used to be forming a corporation was a very hard process, and you had to go through a lot of different loophole or a lot of different hurdles to get it done because people back then realized and appreciated that one of the things a corporate form does is it disperses responsibility. And so people are going to tend to make less moral decisions if they don't feel like they're, oh, well, it wasn't me, it was my boss that said I had to do that. And, you know, I had to do that to maximize shareholder value, blah, 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 blah.
that's how the Nazis arose. I didn't do it. The government.
I did. The government told me to do it. Yeah, yeah, that's the Nuremberg defense. And
Exactly.
yeah, and so, but my point is, it doesn't have to be that way. Like we could literally say we're going to value companies based on profits and other things. Like for example, we could say we're going to evaluate legally. We're going to say that corporations not only have to take into account shareholder value, they have to take in the external impact on X, Y, or Z, and pick whatever you want. So my point is that's the way it is, but that's not the way it has to be.
Exactly.
Right.
And this is where we need to bring wisdom to the table, right? And
yeah.
And the thing is that the thinking, this is what we call, we've talked about trying to escape our own minds. I think corporations have to, escape their own corporate charter, which is make money, make money. Hang on, we're raping and pillaging the planet. We need to look after the planet. We've got to live with it. We've got to actually work in balance, and a whole bunch of other things. And I actually haven't read what the happiness index in Bhutan actually includes, but I'm sure it's not just about making money.
Yeah, and the thing I realized about money, not to, so I got plenty of money. Okay, the lawyers get paid. I have a comfortable lifestyle. And by the way, I don't have anything at all against people wanting to make money or people being wealthy. I think if you work hard and you provide a service that people want to pay for, you should be able to enrich yourself because of that. What I have a problem with is when that's all it's about.
Yeah.
And what I realized was, and this may sound stupid to you and your listeners, but I realized, so I got to a point financially where I basically had everything I wanted. And like I have the car I want to drive, I live in the neighborhood I want to drive, I wear the clothes I want to wear, I do the things I want to do. And what I realized was, like, for example, a house, you can only physically exist in one room at a time. Like, I mean, how big, like how much, like if you have a house that's 40,000 square feet, you're literally never going to experience 90% of your own house. And so do you really get any additional happiness out of it? Like if you're really into cars and you have a really nice car, you can only drive that car one car at a time and only at certain times. So are you really going to get that much more happiness? So I guess my point is there's all these studies that say up to a certain amount of money, once you have a certain amount of money, anything on top of that doesn't increase your happiness at all. I think that I know that is 100% true. And what people that are focused only on money, they're not wise people because they haven't realized that, sure, you have to have a certain amount of money to be comfortable and all that sort of thing. But beyond that, it really, truly doesn't matter. Like at least in terms of your everyday, day-to-day well-being, it does not matter at all. And in some ways, it's kind of like the old paradox. If you seek happiness, paradoxically, you will be unhappy. If you seek purpose or meaning, that will lead to happiness. And it's the same thing with money. If you seek money, you'll probably get it, but it's not going to make you happy.
Yeah.
Whereas if you seek to do well or to provide a service to people, you're probably going to make money. No. And you'll probably be happier doing it, by the way.
Yeah. And I think you've touched on really important points. And look, for me, like you, I've got enough money. So what's important to me more is being in nature, just like you go fly fishing, for example. It means having a dinner party where you sit around and talk shit with all your friends over a few glasses of wine. And so choosing happiness is multifaceted. And that leads me to my final question I want to ask you. What would you do every day, even if you weren't paid for it? What brings you joy? That's really what I'm asking. We've talked about the happiness index, but what brings Brian true, heartfelt joy? I'm curious.
I hate to say this, but I wouldn't change a thing. I do exactly what I'm doing right now. That has not always been the case by a long shot, but you know, I heard this saying a long time ago. There are two guys talking. They see this billionaire on TV or something, and one guy goes to the other, "Oh man, that guy's he's got billions and billions of dollars." And the other guy says, well, I have something he doesn't have. The guy's like, what could you possibly have that this billionaire doesn't have? And he said, I have enough. And that's kind of how I feel right now at this stage in my life. I wouldn't change what I'm doing at all. And it's not just about the law, by the way. I have a lot of other things that I do. I spend a lot of time with my kids. I'm involved in a lot of different charitable stuff. I do a lot in jiu-jitsu. I have a lot of younger Brazilian guys that I sponsor, and talking to people like you, quite frankly, like the conversations like this are, this really makes me happy. Like this energizes me, having discussions about this. And then, tonight I'm going to cook dinner for my wife. I might have a glass of wine or two, might watch a little TV, and then I'll wake up and do it again tomorrow. And that's enough for me, quite frankly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like you've actually organized your multiple blisses into one bliss called life. And it involves thinking and non-thinking, which I think is the paradox. And it has been an absolute joy talking to you, Brian. You
too, Jeff.
It's been an absolute joy. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this with beautiful, smart people around the world. And that's what brings me joy as well. And there's many other things, but that's
me too.
Part of my bucket of bliss, let me call it that way. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Jeff.